Is all that training you're doing gonna help you do what you want it to do? Hey everyone, it's Brian with some more Bomber Beta. I'm doing a multi-part series on how to build a training routine for climbing. So if you guys want to get notified when I release new videos, go ahead and subscribe and hit that bell notification. I want to give a quick disclaimer. I'm not a trainer. If you guys can afford to pay for a trainer to write a training plan for you, I would highly suggest doing that. So this is episode 2 in the series, and in this episode we're talking about goals and if your training routine will actually help you achieve the goals that you're trying to get them to achieve. Now, goals can be a lot of different things. It can be climbing a certain grade, it can be climbing a certain climb, it can be climbing a certain number of climbs, anything like that. Now, a lot of people will get on me because I seem to be only focused on grades when I'm talking about goals. Now, I think that you can be focused on other things in climbing, but if you're wanting to train for climbing, I think it's good to have some kind of black and white win at the end. Like, did I send the climb that I want to do? Did I send the grade that I wanted to do, or something like that? Because that can be a huge motivating factor. A lot of times we want to set up secondary goals as well that will give us kind of those short-term wins to keep us motivated while we're training hard, trying to get better at climbing, ultimately to send our big goal. But maybe your goal is to climb V10, but I also want to climb 10 V6s this year. That would be a great goal because then you can focus on climbing those 10 V6s while you're training in order to get strong enough to send the V10 and ultimately get better at climbing through the whole entire process. So a lot of times when we make these goals, we just jump right into a training plan without actually thinking if it will help us succeed in our goals. So the first question we need to ask is exactly that. Will my training routine help me succeed in my goals? Now, this is something that's very important because if you're not doing the things that you need to do to get better at the things that you're struggling with on the climbs that you're trying, or something that you just ultimately am not good at. Like I specifically am, I have particularly weak fingers for my climbing strength. So that is something that I always focus on getting better at. But that's not the only thing that I focus on when I'm trying to get to my goals. There's a lot of things to consider here, and it's something that is going to be different for all of us. But we want to ask ourselves the question so we know if we are doing what we need to do to actually achieve what we want to. So I already touched on this a little bit, but the second question we want to ask ourselves about our training routine is, does it address our weaknesses? If we get tunnel vision and only focus on the things that are going to help us achieve our goal, we can obviously run into issues down the road where we have significant weaknesses in certain parts of our body and certain parts of our climbing, which will ultimately make it so we cannot progress forward at a certain point. So always address your weaknesses in some aspect in your training routines, regardless of what your goals are. And I think something that a lot of people forget is, will the training plan actually interfere with my performance? Depending on what your goal is, a lot of the people that watch my channel, their goals are specifically on outdoor climbs and on limit climbs that they can't do when they think about it at first. So that's going to be something that's very futuristic, and it could take up to a whole entire year, maybe even more, to end up finally getting to that point. Now, one thing that we need to worry about is actually being able to perform and have fun climbing still while we're training. Because if our training plan actually inhibits our performance at climbing overall, it can be really hard to stay motivated and continue to love climbing. Like, for example, for me, when I do heavy deadlifts, it can be up to 4 days after that I'm feeling the effects of those deadlifts. And that can really deteriorate my performance at climbing. Now, I think that after I'm done doing the deadlifts, after I'm done with that training cycle, I feel significantly stronger. But if you're trying to climb during that, and trying to perform at a certain level during that, it can be very difficult. So you have to decide whether that trade-off is right for you and going to ultimately complete your goals, and how important are those goals to you in turn to other goals that you have in your life or in climbing. So now I'm going to tell you guys 2 stories about training for climbing and trying to align your goals to what you actually want to do on the wall. So somebody on the Discord server had asked a few questions, and I think they were coming back from an injury, and they were training this very long traversy V8, I believe it was. I think it was 7B plus in the font scale. And it was a very long traverse into a V7 that they had already done. And they were trying to train for endurance. And they were asking a lot of questions on how to train for endurance. And eventually I brought up the point of, what exactly type of endurance do you want to get? What is most similar to what you want to do on your project? Because they were asking about, should I do top roping on the auto belay, or should I do like 4x4 boulders? And it was pretty simple to answer that question, because we had decided that the moves and the style of climbing that he was training for was much more similar to what you would find in a 4x4 bouldering setup rather than a top rope auto belay. So, even though both of them would get you some type of endurance or power endurance, however you look at it, I know it's kind of gets blended at that point. But it's good to actually train on things that we want to get better at, and put ourselves in the situations that will actually get the same stimulus in our muscles and develop the techniques and the mental capacity to actually finish those climbs. So the second example I have was actually my first experience with actually aligning my training with my goals. This was a few years ago, and it was me finding my real first project. At the time, it was a V10. It's probably more of a slash grade now, but it was the hardest boulder that I had ever tried, and it ended up being the hardest boulder that I'd ever sent. But one of the moves on it, you had to swing your left foot out of this heel toe cam, and every time I tried it, it felt like somebody was kicking me in the stomach. I did not have the core to hold it up, and I had never trained core very religiously up to that point. And once I decided that I wanted to send this climb, I started training core in ways that would help me with that. And I think the first time I tried it was in December. I ended up sending it in March. And progressively, as I was trying, and I was training core every day, I was trying to get way stronger in my core. And I ended up going from not even being able to do that move to being able to do it maybe once. And then a week later, maybe twice in the session. And then a couple weeks later, I was able to do it multiple times. And by the time I sent it, I was able to do it as many times as I could. And other parts of my body would start to fatigue before my core would give out. And, that was something where I was almost only focused on core training. And that was my real weakness at that point. And that was so important for that boulder that it became easy to do it after my core was strong enough. So knowing exactly what you need to get stronger at for the climb that you want to do is so important. So make sure that you understand that before you build a training routine, and ultimately maybe not hit the things that you need to hit. So I have a list of a few kind of techniques or exercises that I would suggest doing if you find that you want to strengthen certain aspects of your climbing. So the number one thing that I think you should focus on for almost everybody is going to be finger strength. And the easiest way to get better at that is to do a good hangboarding routine. This is probably something that you see people at almost all levels of training for climbing are going to do some type of hangboarding, because having strong fingers is arguably the most important part of climbing. The second thing is, if you're looking to get more power, campusing is going to be a really good way to do it. Now you can do this on jugs, you can do it on the small campus rungs, anything. It's going to help increase your power, but ultimately we want to work down to those smaller rungs, and that will be the most realistic to what we find on the wall. But just developing that power, if it's not something that's natural to you, can be so beneficial for your climbing. If your project, or if you're struggling with lock-off strength, weighted pull-ups can be a really good way to address that. It's pretty simple. You're just going to weigh yourself down with weights, preferably around like your climbing harness or something like that, and do pull-ups on a bar. You can do this on edges, which will be more beneficial to climbing. It might be something that you want to work into, and that can be a very good exercise. You could also do this one-armed with body weight or even assisted, and that will help you develop that lock-off strength. I think everybody should work on their core pretty much every time you train, but that's a good thing to address even more significantly if you're in a situation like I was, where your core was obviously the weak point of your climbing. It's a good idea to do a really good core exercise. I have one that I'll link up here, so go ahead and check that out. If your project or the climbs that you want to get better at are overhangs, I would say doing some deadlifts and some front levers will increase your core strength a lot, and that would be even more beneficial than the exercises that I'm doing in that link that I gave you a second ago. That can really help you hold that tension in those overhanging positions and not have your feet flying all over the place. And if you do have to do a foot cut, you'll be able to bring your feet back up fairly easily. If you're struggling with compression or you want to do a compression boulder, doing some bench press, pec flies, push-ups, things like that can really help give your pecs and your chest a little bit of a boost in order to get better at that aspect of climbing. And if you're struggling at some type of skill-based thing, such as maybe like a technique like a drop knee or a toe hook, or even like slab climbing or something like that, the best thing for you to do is going to be try boulders like that. I hope that this video has helped you think about making your goals, and if your training routine is actually helping you progress with your goals. Make sure you guys subscribe, because I'm going to be releasing a whole video series on building a routine for climbing, and this is a really good basis. But in the next videos, we're going to be talking about actually building the routine and what exercises to do and things like that. So I'll catch you in the next one.